My stapler. I got my stapler. It is my
Have a
stapler.
red swing line.
My wife bought it for me for I think Valentine's Day.
I heard they like discontinued it or some like insane like executive decision level stuff where it's like no one cares about your staplers except because of this movie Office Space. Why don't you just
Yeah.
make only those?
They with the first one we got had like a problem with the finish, and I was like, no, send this back. This is a
Yeah.
memento. Okay.
No. No, we're not.
I need a crispy
What is
one.
this? So they have no QC either? It's like poor decision making, no quality control. Go figure.
Yeah, just the whole movie. The whole movie.
Yeah. Oh God, you're right. Oh my God. Imagine working there and being like, this is just like Office Space, and we make the Office Space stapler. That's
You can start a whole company on that. What are you doing? We're building a stapler called Office Space. It's fine.
we're like trying to be the living embodiment of the hell, the corporate hell that that movie portrays.
You know, I guess yeah. All right, we should introduce ourselves. It's fine. We're bad at that, so we should probably do
Yeah,
that.
let's continue on that because I also have a thing to say about that movie. Uh,
Yeah.
Matthew Sanabria, as you all know, has been on the channel many times. He also has his own. I guess where's your biggest thing now? So you started a YouTube channel that has phenomenal long form, deeply technical content. I keep shouting this out, but you did a great TCP introduction that I'm still sending people like to. So not TCP, you know what I'm saying? It,
TLS, yeah.
it was TCP.
There's TLS. I did a TCP
TLS,
book
thank
club.
you. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
That's the one.
yeah.
Um, eh, aren't you just glad I didn't call it SSL at least? The
It's so 2006.
but
You
he's
know.
active everywhere else. You can see it. Yeah, I think like LinkedIn, you're kind of like a big deal on LinkedIn. I feel like you post and a lot of
Yeah,
people.
I got a lot of good engagement on LinkedIn. So I'm trying to, I've been very busy lately, but I've been trying to like keep my social stuff up.
Yeah, because like here's the thing, we're real engineers and keeping your social stuff up is really hard because like
Yeah.
when he's not, fucking tweeting, Matthew is busy being a staff engineer at Cockroach Labs, which is kind of the
Yes,
dopest
yes.
thing, which is weird that I left it for last, but yeah. So he's the real deal if you haven't seen him
Yeah,
before.
we'll talk more about that. And obviously we have Dave Cohen here, right? He is the author of the Software Developer's Guide to Linux, his newly released book. So please go look at it and buy it if you are looking to learn more about Linux.
I
Um,
asked Matthew to do this and it's even I feel
does it
even
feel
more
weird?
cringed
Does it
out by
feel weird?
myself now.
Yeah.
Because I have such a hard time marketing my own stuff that I
No,
was
I'll
like,
market
you do
you.
it.
Yeah, yeah, I'll market the hell out of you, man. Listen, go buy the
You're
damn book,
hired.
right?
I
Okay.
certainly can't do it. So it's
It's
anyway,
like listening
yes.
to your own audio. It just feels weird,
Mm,
you know.
yeah, yeah.
And Dave's
But yes, I
also,
wrote a book about Linux. If you're a software developer, there's stuff in it that will hopefully make your life a lot easier without having to learn like all of Linux the way you would for being a sysadmin or something else. It's kind of just the stuff that's important to know for you or useful to know for a software developer. That's the idea. So you can leave the other 600 pages at home, from your like intro to Ubuntu Linux or your Red Hat,
I
exam
remember
stuff.
those books. Thick,
Yeah, the Red
thick
Hat
books.
stuff, like great stuff,
Yeah.
thorough, interesting, but it's just like even up there, my favorite still the Unix and Linux System Administrator's Handbook in whatever
Yeah, I love that. I love
now.
that book.
It's amazing, but it's like
Yeah.
not every software developer needs that.
That's a book that you read when you're in college or whatever, so you can get it under your belt and you have all the free time in the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The book you wrote is a book you read when you're actually doing things and
Yeah,
need the quick understanding of, okay, how do I do these things in Linux?
that's exactly it. That was my friend Christian and I started writing it. One of the like inciting incidents was someone at his work years ago, I will say, for privacy purposes, uh, was like a reasonably seasoned developer and had gotten hired and was suddenly working with their like Docker build pipeline and was like, it turned out he didn't understand like shell commands in Linux. And it
Yeah.
was like that Docker is just like that. And every state change is kind of a new layer on that file. It was just like it was and we sort of realized, at first we were like kind of laughing about it, like, wow, like can you believe someone made it like 10 years in this industry without knowing
Yeah.
that? But yes, you can, because that guy is probably really good at a bunch of other stuff that I don't understand. And it's just a nook of the industry he's never been in. The idea of the book being like, let's fill in some of those gaps so that the first time you're like building a Docker container, you're not making all the mistakes that we made at first, making a 2 gig
I've
image.
seen I've seen it too. Like there's these people, staff plus architect, whatever, software engineer, this and that. And it's like, can you just LS and tell me what's going on over here? What's LS? And it's like, yeah,
Oh, not what's
it's I mean, yeah, that's a simplified example, but it's easy to kind of like poke fun at these people. But realistically speaking, like the Venn diagram of your skills and their skills as it relates to Linux maybe just don't overlap at all. They just don't have those skills, but they have skills elsewhere.
yeah.
And yeah, it's tough, but there is a market for this because the fact of the matter is, no matter what software you're writing, odds are it's probably running on Linux somewhere. So you should know how to like work with Linux in case your software breaks, right? So,
It's the idea.
but cool.
Can we
I know.
oh, go ahead.
Go for it. Go.
I was gonna say back to Office Space for a second.
Yeah, I was literally gonna pick up my stapler.
I saw the most amazing video. I forget who made it, but it was someone basically making the case that when it came out in 1999, I think Office Space was kind of like because I said, the embodiment of like the office from hell, like a vision from hell kind of, but like by today's work standards, it's actually not a bad gig at all.
Yeah,
Like, and this guy was basically pointing out like long lunch breaks, like, yeah, you have an annoying boss and occasionally you got to work overtime, but it's like expected that you are working 9 to 5 at most, and you're like out for a lot of that time. You're like,
yeah.
there's jokes in there. People are just like, yeah, actually, like I just from 8 to 12, I pretty much just like stare at my desk, hoping that no one notices I'm not doing
No,
it.
it's funny because like I didn't know this movie was released in 1999, and like I only watched it for the first time in my life earlier this year in 2024. I never
Really?
watched this movie growing up or any of it. And my
Wow.
wife was like, "You have to watch it," and I did, and that's where I got, she bought
Right.
me a stapler, blah 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 blah.
Amazing.
But I was like, "Wow, there's this this crap has been going on for a while in the industry." Like the stuff we're experiencing now in the
Yes.
2024 job market, like this has been happening.
Yes.
Managers have been garbage. Companies have been garbage for a long time, and so have employees too, to a certain extent. But I
Sure.
was like,
Sure.
damn, this is if you like just updated the decor, you would think that that's like a
Yes.
modern
Wardrobe and
movie.
decor, and you have your
Yeah,
like put a fucking ping pong table in the corner, and that's like a startup,
exactly.
Like, oh, there's
Put a ping
beer
pong
on
table
tap, but no one's in.
like a DoorDash driver coming into the office, and you're good. That's all
Exactly.
you need.
It's true. That's really
But
interesting.
yeah,
Was that your
it like
impression kind of seeing it earlier this year? It's just like, whoa.
I was like, my impression was just like, oh wow, this has been going on. I don't know why people are complaining because it's been broken. You know what I mean? Clearly nobody's going to fix it because it's been broken for 2 decades.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think so much of like what we grew up with, like people in our age bracket, let's say like 30s to late 40s, like the agile movement being like totally a normal part of like the sort of best practice that we came up with. Um, and I'm sure that at the beginning, what agile meant was like fairly clear, and it was like, people
Yeah.
over processes, and like always just ship a bunch of software and like adjust as needed, and like don't plan everything up front, and like well, I guess that's not even in there. It's even simpler than that. It's these principles. But like having seen through our kind of career, that stuff just get co-opted. It was a way of like breaking out of that corporate madness and having that all just actually just like re-co-opted into corporate madness with like
Yeah.
professional like scrum masters, and they're just the
You're
easiest to
seeing
pick on. But it's
exactly. You're seeing it with AI right now. Like the way that like Atlassian built a Jira product around like the software development lifecycle, especially agile, is the same way these AI companies are building like job descriptions around AI, right? Like the prompt engineer crap that there was going on for a while, the scrum master job, right? It's the same thing.
yeah,
When you get like a movement or a principle or whatever you want to call it, and you like create companies around it, you kind of ruin the principle. You know what I mean? Like it's a way of working, not a
yeah,
position. It's like the
yeah,
DevOps methodology too. Like it's a way of working, not a title that you give some good engineer and overwork them to death, you know? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's an interesting
sad.
thing. The company is I agree. Like even I mean we worked at I mean you're no longer there. I'm still there, but like HashiCorp is I think a good example of that where like the you see that over the years just the enormous pressure of like having to operate as a company uh just like kind of twists a lot of the incentives that make it the unique and interesting thing it is at the beginning. You know, when
Yeah.
like, and you and I, you know, we're not like early employees. We're not like employee 50 or something or 7, you know,
Yeah, we're
those
like
parts are still there.
300-400-ish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even when we showed up, like, I think there was still, you could, there was a strong feeling of that like not corporate at all culture.
Right.
It was just like I got so much done. Like my team the
Yep.
first year got more done probably than uh, we have in the last 2 years.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, agreed.
my current team, it's like my team's doing great work, but it's like priorities change. We this is actually not true of my current team. It's the team before it. We were in a really tough position with like, the classic corporate like problems. 16 stakeholders, all of which have like veto power over your projects, and you're like, you see this coming and you're like, no one thinks these incentives are like probably gonna fuck this whole thing up. Everyone's like, nope, this is what the VP asked for. So it's like, okay, the VP asked for it, like full steam ahead. And then,
Yep.
like you get almost done shipping, and then one person sees it, it's like, no, we wanted a different thing. And then it's like, okay, well, like it'll be crunch time for another month and we'll miss the deadline and we'll change it last minute, just like all the
Yeah.
worst parts of that kind of
I
slowly.
think companies like they look at other successful companies, and we're going to define success the way the market does, make a crap ton of money, right?
Mhm.
That's the success benchmark for a lot of people. And they looked at a company like VMware, and they tried to emulate that. And they're like, hey, if VMware can do it and make all this money in IPO, why can't we? Right? And
Yeah.
HashiCorp, it was no like secret that HashiCorp was trying to be the next VMware. It was
Yeah.
said multiple times from the leadership. But like that also was like antithetical to their values almost, right?
Yeah.
Like to do that means the values that you founded upon need to kind of die in some respect or just be like
Like
reborn
move
in a
over.
weird, yeah,
Yeah. For stuff that's just more important.
exactly.
And it's not even like those values really conflict with like the underlying goals of a business, which is like make money. Like those principles work fine for building incredible products and starting to make money. It's just that like the reality of building and growing a large company, like those things are not about making money. They're about like structure and like to have the right
Yeah.
abstraction. How do we manage this many people and how do we have like a cohesive culture and how do we deal with projects that go across like 6 organizations? Um, and those things end up kind of like often stifling that original culture.
No, I agree. Like, and you see it, I've seen it time and time again, going from company to company, like smaller company that's trying to be a big company, they make the same mistakes, right? They start and they say, oh, we have to move fast and ship and ship and ship. And it's like, okay, great. But you've now given everybody admin permissions on everything because
Yeah.
you were like, our back? No, thank you. I'm just gonna ignore that. You've now also the code looks like crap because you're just shipping and nobody's thinking through the code. So now you have this team, using like one part of the service, this team using another part of the service. They have their own assumptions, they have their own assumptions. And it's like, can someone just you have to like slow down to speed up sometimes, right?
Yes.
Like the whole what shooter is like one of my favorite movies with Mark Wahlberg.
Uh,
And it's like he
don't
says in the movie, like slow is smooth, smooth is fast,
I have
right?
a t-shirt that says that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And but it's true. Like you kind of have to take a step and breathe and like think about what you're doing for a second because it's going to speed you up later on. And a lot of companies, no, MVP must go out. Customers asking. It's like, come on, man. They're not asking for it because it's the week before Thanksgiving and they're gone. Like,
Exactly.
let's be real.
It's
Like, you know
yeah,
what I mean?
exactly. It's like management and a PM picked a date. Let's face it.
Yeah.
And they could have just picked a different date. Like there's actually nothing
Exactly.
really depending on it. Yeah, I get like sometimes there's like a sale or whatever. I gotta let my dog in.
No,
But
dude.
often that's just like it's a completely made up deadline that is actually it just makes people
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. It's most of these deadlines are made up, and in my opinion, and I know you're away from the door, so I'm
I got you.
stalling to you. In my like most of these deadlines are actually made up, and maybe they align to some quarterly goal or this or that, but they are kind of made up for the most part. And it's in my opinion, these like weird deadlines that they often put are either sometimes they align with like conferences and they want to announce something and get the marketing momentum, blah blah
Sure.
blah. Sure. But other times I think it's just to keep them moving forward. Because if you don't
Yeah,
give a deadline, you'll never ship anything. You
I
know?
agree.
Rarely have I ever
It does
worked
make
for a
people work
true hard
harder
deadline.
and
Yeah.
faster. It does. Made a really interesting point. Slowing down to speed up, I think, is very like unsexy, but like you cannot. It's just the truest thing there is. It's like I'm noticing it, on my own, like working on a side project. Writing in a new language, just like writing some code to learn something, and the the wild thing is, it's not even a large project. I am in
Yeah.
complete control of all of it, and yet, I was like, well. I don't need tests. It's small enough. It's like basic, like CRUD stuff. It's fine. And here we are, just months later, and I'm breaking stuff in parts of the app that I did not think my commit could have broken anything in. And
Yep.
it's like, what could have helped with that? Having tests, and it's just
Yep.
like I actually went back this weekend and spent like 5 hours just like getting all the tests to work and like writing a bunch of basic tests to catch like the basic functionality so that when and if that breaks, um, I can tell. It's like so basic. It's like
No,
programming.
no, it's true. It's so true. Like it's true and it's a fundamental and we forget about it all the time. And it's not even just writing tests per se. It's just writing in general, right?
Mm,
Like you writing tests, the value of writing tests isn't just so that it verifies the system being correct or whatever. It's also so that you write down the usage of the APIs you're using and you better understand the system.
yeah,
It's no different than writing like your engineering principles or guidelines, right? That's a test almost in its own right because it's trying to like adhere to a system. But it's the fact that you're writing that down in the first place that means you are understanding the system, and that's the real value in this stuff, and a lot of people don't take any time to understand the system. They just code, put up a pull request, and they don't even review their own pull requests. They just literally get it to the bare minimum working and they ship it.
mm,
And it's like you're not engineering there.
yeah.
You're just hacking at things.
Hacking. I think that's a very accurate assessment. Huh. Um, how has it been, speaking of hacking, going from going from being a senior engineer at HashiCorp to now being a staff engineer at Cockroach?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have very, very interesting mixed feelings about everything because like on one hand, part of me is like titles are all a lie, right? Like, like someone could be senior staff level or someone can be like, mid-career level, and if you switch them in different roles, they'll both be like, one the senior staff might be mid again and the mid might be senior staff, right? So part of me is like titles are a bunch of crap, but then also like titles do kind of help. People respect them, right? It's no different than like, oh, that person's a doctor and what they
Yeah,
said must be true. It's kind
sure.
of the same thing,
Yeah,
and people do kind of respect the fact that you are a higher title and they want to hear your input and you do have some power to like influence things and even block things if necessary, right? So it's been a
yeah, it's
weird
true.
shift for me. Yeah.
It's true.
It's
Yeah, becoming an authority. It's true. It kind of empowers you to like. Whereas if you were just one of three senior engineers working on a project, you probably can't just be like, "Hey, should we even be doing it this way? Like, this doesn't make sense."
yeah.
It's like your voice might get lost in those meetings. If you're a staff engineer, that's like the staff engineer on this. and you're like, hang on, I see some real problems with this. Like, is
Yeah.
there another approach, or can we like think about this differently? That gets taken seriously. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, no, and it's true. And it's like everyone thinks that, oh, you go to the staff level and now you're just like you're programming all day, every day. It's like, nope, I'm really not. I am guiding the projects, right? I am like writing design documents. I am unblocking my team. I am not the best engineer on my team in terms of like software engineering and
Yeah.
coding. I'm not. And I don't need to be. But like I understand a lot of different layers of the stack and how what they're working on like interacts with these layers. So I'm able to like see, oh wait, that implementation you have there, that's a problem because this is going to be called in this like tight loop somewhere, blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
Right? You bring the context to everything and you unblock all your engineers and
Mhm.
you get more done just by unblocking others and being that like technical resource than you would have if you just like locked me in a room all day and just told me to code for 8 hours.
Yeah.
Like that's not where the value is coming from me.
Yeah. Um, where has like how has your day to day changed? Like what would you say kind of the proportion of like meetings, document writing, like a lot of reading, I imagine, to
Yeah.
understand kind of what adjacent teams are doing or
No, that's a good question. Definitely like I am in a lot more meetings than I used to be, for better or for worse. Some of them I've chosen, right? Like one-on-ones with people, pair programming sessions, mentoring, like I've chosen to have those on my calendar.
Mhm.
Others are just like project syncs and just talking with other teams about certain projects. So it's a mix. It's definitely more meetings than I expected it to be. Um, but that's kind of the name of the game. If you don't, if nobody's in control over something or owning something, it's easy for projects to just like go their own way. So I'd rather like take 20, 30 minutes of my time to sync with somebody and be on the same page
Yeah.
rather than come back in 30 days and be like, wait a minute, why did you do this? So it's kind of worth coding wise. The rest of my time is spent doing some sort of technical thing. So if I had to put a percentage, I'm probably in like 40% meetings, 20% reading, and then the rest, what is that, 40 more percent maybe coding, it in the average.
that feels that feels very realistic. Are there any
Yeah.
resources that you used kind of like, jumping into a new role, that whole like it is a learning experience, like learning what works, learning what you're expected to do, learning what is actually effective for you to do.
Yeah.
Were there any resources that you used or books you read that made that leap easier? Or
Yeah, yeah. I read the staff engineer book. I think it's like staffeng.com, staffeng.com. I read that book. That's a really good book. And then I read Engineering Management for the Rest of Us by Sarah. That's a really good book too. And that helped me like understand what my technical and non-technical like roles should be, you know?
contribute? Yeah.
So I kind of read those going in to see if I could like kind of pattern match the patterns you see in the book with what I'm experiencing in the role and seeing like, oh, I remember that in the book they said that design documents are blah 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 and like here's what I should be the value I should be providing with design documents. Like it just kind of using them as resources after you know what to look for.
Mhm. That's really it's funny. I was just talking to someone yesterday, Daniel from HashiCorp.
Oh, nice.
And we were talking about that. We were talking about mentoring new people. We both have some interns coming in, and we both really enjoy like mentoring and teaching. I think you do too. Um,
Yeah.
you mentioned pattern matching, and it was funny because I was saying one of the real benefits I uh, find of working with newer engineers is we often have such an advantage just based on our experience, which is literally like pattern matching, right? It's like when I
Yep.
look at a log, I often don't have to understand the code. I'm like, it's probably DNS. It's probably
Yep.
like something in like the view layer, like it's some HTML, like there's an empty nil thing and it's trying to like render a bunch of stuff from that and that stuff's empty, whatever.
Exactly.
That we have such a database of stuff to like heuristics to pattern match against because we've just seen a bunch of things go wrong. Um, that often I find it a really good I'm actually surprised at how much I rely on heuristics now as a more senior engineer. Um, where I have to remind myself, and this is what I was talking to Daniel about, to keep building my muscle of like engineering from like first principles, like logical thinking,
Yes.
differential
Yes.
diagnosis, because that's all new engineers have. They don't have any experience yet. So that's how you measure a new engineer. It's like, are they capable of learning, and are they do they have a rigorous like engineering approach? Go ahead.
That's like we'll talk about this. This is the book I'm reading right
Uh,
now, and they explicitly call out the dangers of bringing your intuitions with you
ooh,
in
yeah,
terms of
it's
like
dangerous.
debugging. Yeah. Yeah. And they're
100%.
like, please debug from first principles, blah 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 blah. And they kind of go into it. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I agree. Like, and that's why I read these books so that like I can recognize these patterns that I'm seeing, then reference like kind of the content and saying, okay, what's like the best use of my time in this situation? Somebody's asked me to review a design doc. What's like the best value that I can provide them with this, rather than bringing just my intuition and just saying, oh, that's not going to work because DNS,
Yes.
right? Like, I need to make sure I'm fighting against that a little bit. Like, it's okay to pattern match and get kind of the context you need, but don't just
Yeah.
blindly,
That's not where it
give an
ends. That tells you where to
exactly.
start
Yeah,
looking, not
exactly.
the answer. Yeah, exactly.
Like the only other things that I'll talk about with the staff engineering stuff is number one, like when I first joined Cockroach, I was like, whoa, I am like imposter syndrome. I am not a staff engineer. What the how the heck did I trick these people into hiring me? Like,
Man, you
what's going
deserve
on?
it. You're
Yeah.
there for
I
sure.
was just like, what the hell did I do? But as I stay there, and this is not like I'm not speaking ill or anything, but like I realized as I like grow in my career there and I work with other teams, I realize why they hired me at the level, because I do have a lot of deep context on things and I am able to like unblock gobs of work and people and like give that context. So when I first started, I was like, no, I don't deserve to be here. And then now I'm like, no, I do deserve this title and to be here. And I see why. Like it's not just because I passed the coding interviews and I did well on the lead code style. It's because of like the value I'm providing to my team and across teams, right? So I've seen that and I'm trying to like, remind myself that hey, staff engineering is not just being like a bomb programmer, it's also like enabling the teams around you.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to remind myself that because it's easy to be like, well, this engineer who's like just out of college can code circles around you. It's like, well, that's not what a great staff
Yeah.
engineer makes,
There's a
you
lot of
know?
people that can pass leak code interviews that are just lost as soon as they're doing real stuff.
Yeah.
It's a different game. It's like you got to be good at both games, but like it's a different game.
And yeah, and like the last quick thing before we move on to the next thing is the power dynamic is definitely there in the sense of like, people see titles and they kind of see a power dynamic there. I try very hard to like not have that power dynamic, and I don't generally introduce myself as like staff eng in that regard. I'm just an SRE man, like it's fine. But if I'm like giving conference talks or something, or
Call
if I'm
me
doing something
sir.
else, yeah, call me sir,
You
please.
don't have a name until your first
Yeah,
son.
yeah, exactly. So, but when I'm doing like more professional things, I do like to put the title there just because it does help like people see like, oh, this person's opinion probably matters. But
Yeah, and
it was
it's
weird
important for like how you fit into the org. Like they're gonna
yeah,
come to you with things that are not appropriate to bring to an engineer that's just like doing project work. On so not that that's
there's a
less important. It's just like those people don't bug those people. Like bug the
yeah,
team lead, bug the staff engineer.
there's an interesting thing in the staff engineer book where it says about like being in the room, right? Where the room where the decisions are made. And like it's weird being in that room, right? It's a metaphorical room, but like it's weird being in that room now because it's like, oh, my opinion matters. You're actually looking at me to answer this question. Like I me? Oh, okay. And it was just a weird power dynamic and it's a weird like change to get accustomed to, right? Because when I was a senior eng at HashiCorp, like they didn't care if I had big ideas. In fact, like our directors at HashiCorp said that my takes were spicy, right? So here it's like, no,
I
Matt, what
read
do you
those
think? The
takes. They were not
yeah,
particularly
I know.
spicy
Yeah.
at all.
And like here it's like, oh, what do you think about this architecture thing? Oh, I think that we can change blah blah blah. Oh, good
Yeah.
point. And it's like the discussion's so different that I'm like thrown off guard a little bit, you know?
You're like, wait, are they lulling me into a false sense of
Yeah,
security?
yeah, yeah. I like,
Put me on
are you
a
getting me right now?
That's
Because
enough
I'm pretty
opinions out
good.
of you,
I
Sanabria.
it takes a lot to get me, you know, like, come on, man. I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm here.
this dude's on his toes. You
Yeah.
gotta. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the TLDR of everything.
No, that's super interesting. I think people will find that very interesting. I know that before I've never been a staff, I've never had the title of staff engineer. I was a team lead for a while, I think over a year, um, 2 teams ago. So like on my last team.
Yeah.
And I just remember that being a huge, I took it almost not thinking, that sounds almost like a promotion, like sure. And it was just so different from
Yeah.
what I was used to doing that it was like a culture shock. I mean, it sounds like you went into it a lot more prepared than I did. Um, but yeah, it was a tremendous like learning experience, and in retrospect, I kind of enjoyed it. It was like that team was just truly ill-fated, and like I feel like I did it on hard mode, but it was still a really interesting experience. Like I know that I cannot make everyone happy. I have to make a good technical decision that does take
Yes.
everyone's opinion at least a little bit into account, and then like pick a direction that seems like my team can actually execute it in the time we have, and go and then just keep them unblocked and keep them working and fend off a lot of the political or annoying stuff.
It's it's interesting. Like I try to read about these things to see what's coming, right? And like see what I can prepare for being like staff eng.
Yeah.
And I'm in this role now, like I'm invited to the quarterly plannings for like, that the tech leads and above are pretty much invited to. And it's like, okay, I'm responsible for shaping like 6 months worth of work for the whole company in this org or whatever. That's crazy. Like who gave me that power, But it works. And
Yeah.
I guess I'll end with it's weird because I had a interesting interaction yesterday where there was a bug in the code where like we created a resource with like with the suffix production, but then another part of the resource was using the suffix prod to access that resource, and it was getting like 404 basically not found. And I was like, hey, like here's the bug, what's going on? Da, da, da. Can someone fix this? Right. And I didn't have time to go like dive in and fix it because I was blocked by that bug, but I didn't have time to like go like figure out where exactly everything needs to be updated for it. So I reported to the team and they got it and they were like, hey, listen, it's probably easier to just like keep using this short suffix and like keep going forward. And I was like, well, I don't think we should do that because the rest of the code is using the long suffix and it's more consistent and it has like a method for it here of how to like retrieve that easily. So I think we should do the harder thing of changing the
Deprecate
resource itself.
the long
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
And like they were just like, "Oh yeah, that sounds good." And I was like, "Wait, what? You're not
You were
gonna
just like
like push
shields
back?"
up, like ready.
Yeah. Like you're not gonna push back. You have no rebuttal. You're just gonna be like, "Yeah, like that's it." And I was like,
Uh,
"Oh, okay." Like,
yeah.
and I thanked them. I was like, "Yo, thank you, thank you for being kind, like about this, appreciate it. Let me know if you need any help." And I do that with all my interactions. Like if you see my pull request reviews, I don't want to say always because there's times where I don't, but like for the most part, you'll always see me saying like, thank you for working on this. I always, always, always make sure I tell the people that like I see the work you're doing.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not your manager, but like, thank you for working on this. Here's what I have to think about it. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I make sure that people see that I see them. Right. So
Love it.
yeah.
You started talking about observability just before we hit record. We were just talking about the fact that I'm also working on observability stuff this sprint, and yeah, why don't you show everyone that dope book that you have
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah.
talk about it?
This is the observability engineering book by like people like leadership
The
at
Google
Honeycomb.
SRE people.
Yeah, kind of. It's Honeycomb Leadership wrote this book.
Oh, I
Charity
went over to
Liz
Honeycomb.
George.
Liz Fong Jones
Yeah,
used to be she was like,
yeah. You can. Sorry, wrong. I'm used to the other camera, but yeah, you can see the people that wrote it. Love this book. Really, really, really fun book, and it's available for free on Honeycomb's website. So if you want to read it, have fun. Um, what I like about it is it really talks about this whole it kind of breaks down monitoring and observability and how monitoring is very like, you know, like a trailing indicator, reactive, blah, 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 blah. You have to kind of know the problem you're looking for with monitoring, and how observability is being able to find the thing you're looking for, right? Like by asking different questions of the system.
Yeah.
And they really break that down, and it's really nice to see, because they talk about how the intuition based debugging doesn't scale, doesn't incentivize you to fix your systems, and like overall just is a bad way, and that you should do more first principles debugging and troubleshooting when incidents happen. So they go into all that detail, and it's a really, really good book. So I recommend that, like, if you are responsible for any sort of observability in your company, you should read that book.
That's cool. I've done a ton of observability stuff in my career, and I think I would still do well to read that. I'm just working on kind of like continuing to instrument an app that we wrote really, really quickly. And
Yeah.
um, some months ago, I made a case for, like, hey, let's like really, it's sort of in production, and we are sort of an ops team, but even though we don't really like acknowledge that, but like we should be able to see inside here, be able to track like the important events in sort of app instrumentations, like actually instrumenting the Go app with like custom metrics, and then also just like observability work where we're, looking at
Yeah.
right now, I'm just getting like four golden signals stuff, like saturation, errors, latency, and general like
Yep.
system throughput, just so you can see what the baseline is. And then when things go wrong, you look like, how did the baseline change? Like,
Yep.
what does that tell us about where the problem is? That alone, that is fairly quick. Like, it's going to take me, let's say 2 weeks to kind of finish that up. A coworker of mine, teammate, helped me for several sprints earlier this year. So he's definitely, it's not just my credit, but like, that's, the basics are like fairly easy to set up, and
Yeah.
it goes a long way.
No, it really does. And people, so I'll talk about this in more detail in a second, but like people are afraid to change their code, right? Like this book, there's a page in this book that I took a picture of the other day where it's like engineers treat production as like this glass castle. At the first sign of something going wrong, they just abandon ship and like revert, and they learn nothing new about the system, and they're afraid to touch the system and blah blah blah. And I was like, yeah, I've been in those companies. It sucks. And now you treat production as like it's on a pedestal, and you learn nothing new. You don't instrument it with any information that you need. And now when production breaks, your first instinct is always going to be revert rather than like learn more and instrument. And now you understand your system less and
Yeah.
less and less. And they go into that, and I was like, wow, like I can literally name companies that did that, and it sucks. And then they keep going with that, and they say the only metric, if you have, basically they said, if you have no metrics, the only metric that you should have, like that you should implement first, is the time that it takes for code to be merged and living in production. Track that time. Because if you commit today, right now, and it takes 2 days for your code to be in production, that's horrible, right? Like, track that time and try to reduce that time as much as possible. That should be your first kind of North Star goal, is what they're telling you. The reason being is because that allows you to do quicker deploys to go forward, but
Yeah.
also quicker deploys to fix things,
Yeah.
right? Because the worst feeling, you've been responsible for infrastructure. The worst feeling is, there's an incident, the resolution, but it takes X
Yeah.
period of time
Rolling your
for the
hotfix
fix to
out
go out.
is just
Yeah.
like, fuck.
That
Of course, you do
feels
terrible
so
things.
horrible. Right. Exactly.
That makes
Exactly.
companies do things like, there's a way to circumvent CI and all the
Yes.
testing, and then you push another bug, or like, it just is, it's not, yeah, I agree. It leads to bad things.
Yeah. So it was good. And then, yeah, they talk about like using SLOs for your alerting, and then how observability is not like meant to basically just be for alerting, but observability is meant to, oh, I have an alert, let me find out why. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I know that like my SLO budget, my error budget has been consumed. Let me find out why now with my observability, because I can ask specific questions on the system and narrow this down to like the commit or the user ID that's having this problem, you know? So
Yeah.
that's kind of where they're going at. And I really like reading the book so far.
That's cool. If it's okay for a kind of light segue, still related, I think. Um, I'm finally
Oh
reading
yeah.
a book, like not just prepping for an interview, but like genuinely, like really for my own interest and trying to absorb it.
Yes.
Actually started a little like team like learning and book club on my team. And this is the first thing that we're rolling through. Um, I think this is such a good book as a kind of next step to what you're talking about with that observability stuff, because like the when you're learning about systems, I think there is there's often just like knowledge that's missing because we only work on a certain component, because the system's large
Yep.
enough that there's a team of SREs or platform engineers and then a whole bunch of teams of developers that are all kind of, there's no one that's sure, like the infra folks, the ops folks, whatever you call that team, are responsible for the system being up, the SREs, the platform
Yeah.
people. But like there's a lot of kind of like hands uh that come together to make that happen. And so often, like what we did at Hashi was for Terraform Cloud was like there'd be an SRE on call and an on-call developer, so that if it was like application specific, and it often was, um, you have like a developer that knows that part of the system. These systems are so large that I think a book like this, where it really shows you what large, complex, modern infrastructures are kind of composed of,
Yeah.
is really interesting. And it's more than an infrastructure book, which I'm really like falling in love with this book. I think it occupies a space that I don't know that any other book I've read occupies, because it is firmly like it will make you a better
Yeah.
infrastructure person. Absolutely. But like in the data storage chapter, you get like a 101 crash course in like modern data
Is that
storage
chapter 2?
design. It's chapter 3. It's
Okay.
it's where they go into um like log structured merge trees, and
Oh yes. Yes. I
how
love that chapter.
you like make database indexing out of that. And like how B trees are, and that's this is the other thing. It shows you how the stuff works underneath, and then it kind of educates you enough so that you can understand the trade-offs that are being made. Like there's not a right answer for every
Yep.
part of a system. You get these like, it's like, I'm gonna pick on AWS like cert people, but like, like the AWS cert thing teaches you like, oh, you got a problem? Like here's the AWS product that you're essentially a sales engineer.
Yes.
Um, but like that approach is quite common, and understandably, right? It's like you implement something with Kafka at a company. You're like, all right, that's like if I ever need like a queue, like it's just gonna be like I'm gonna like reapply that heuristic thing, right? Like reapply the thing that I did before. We need a queue, do that queue. It's like you're not stopping to think like, what does my application actually need? What guarantees do I need? What are the most, is speed the most important thing? Is durability the most important thing? Uh,
Correct.
do I need something that's like distributed? Do I need some kind of like partition tolerance? What happens when certain things go wrong? Like what characteristics and constraints, what characteristics are we looking for? What constraints do we have? Does the system have? And then you start looking at for solutions that fit that, not the other way around.
Correct.
Um,
Correct. That's I love that book. I read that book too. Chapter 4, it talks about like encoding data, like how you can encode it with JSON or like protobuf or whatever. And it talks about that and it demystifies it. And like you said, chapter 3, the storage chapter was so good. Like, oh, you mean a database is just stored on disk somewhere in a weirdly
yeah,
like in some weird data structure that just makes
yeah,
it efficient? What? Like this is
yeah,
amazing. Yeah. It really
yeah,
demystified the whole like database storage system. And when I got to Cockroach too, like we use some of those data structures, right?
yeah,
Like we have LSM trees, we have like SS table, we have these things
right.
in our database. And it's just like, oh, I get it now. I know what
Yes,
guarantees they provide. And they
yeah,
break down SQL and NoSQL in that book pretty well too. They're like, they're
agreed.
both great. Pick your poison and see what trade-offs you're gonna get.
Yeah.
So I recommend a lot of people like read that book. And that's why I like reading in general. It's just so it's good. It really is just good.
Um, yeah, I love it. I have not read a book that goes really, because I don't like this, but I'm also prone of thinking of like infrastructure and code as separate things. And we've talked about
Yeah.
like the Elixir and Erlang world has helped me kind of break down some of those like mental barriers and be like, what if your code was the infrastructure, you know? Like a bit of a Lisp thing. What if your data was your code and your code was data? The uh but this is very much another step in like breaking down that those things where it's like your infrastructure is code, a large part of it, and then the code you write also is like it kind of is your infrastructure. Like you are
Yeah.
making infrastructural trade-offs that have like real consequences for how your system behaves, not just the little piece you wrote, but all of it together.
They
Yeah.
were it's like it's your architecture, right? Your architecture is really meant to be your software and your infra like together, right? And like Charity Majors says like
God,
infrastructure
I
is
one day hope to experience an organization that figures out a new way of treating that stuff. I wonder if SREs were like part of the attempt to do that, but
yeah,
like that truly like unifies this like people who are responsible for all of that stuff. Sorry, charity
correct.
managers.
And like Charity has a good quote about infrastructure being the software like you have to run the software you want to run, right? And it's so true. Like I don't like want to run AWS. I have to, right? I
Yeah,
have to run EC2 instance because I need my software to run on it, right? And when we like have that separation of like, oh, the infra is like what you do and the software is what you do. Well, really, realistically speaking, they're part of the same architecture. And a poor architecture decision on the infra side can have devastating effects on the software side
yeah,
and vice versa, right? So you need to kind of see it holistically. And Kelsey Hightower and a couple other people on Twitter were like going back and forth about latency and applications and how like, you know, you should like work to eliminate latency where you can and your architecture decisions affect latency, blah, 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 blah. And in so many ways, the people part of the conversation were kind of talking past one another. But the underlying thing there was your code in isolation is like one thing that can affect your user's experience, in this case, like latency. But also your infrastructure architecture decisions can also negatively affect your user's experience, right? Go put your product, go take HashiCorp's production database and put it on spinning disks and tell me how that is for you,
yes,
right? That is not a code decision, right? That
yep,
is an infrastructure choice. But tell me how that impacts your application. I
totally.
guarantee you, you're not going to have a good time, right?
Yeah,
Like,
write me the world's fastest like Rust web server, and then like you could still have head of line blocking and hello.
correct. Yeah, yeah, correct. like,
Like
like,
yeah, it's kind of does there's yeah, there's just like yeah, that's the thing. There's not just one place to optimize. And once you're dealing with a large system, which is like pretty soon in these days at companies, you really have to think about all of it. Um
and it's like when you look at the cloud, everything's been so abstracted for you. You have APIs for your infrastructure. So now you're running a virtual machine with Kubernetes on top of that and your container in there. So now to do a write, you have to make like a network request through Kubernetes, through the VM, through the network device to do a write to your disk. And we're going to sit here and say that there's no latency there. Come on, man. Like that's why in so many ways the cloud is not the best solution for companies. Sometimes just running your own infra is going to give you a much better experience. And I think Stack Overflow or Stack Exchange, whatever their whole company name is called, they were running on bare metal for a while and they have really good experience with that. And I think people should just be aware that there's no one right way to do this. You should make the right decisions for your use cases. Going all in on cloud or all in on serverless or all in on this, all in on that is not always the right decision. There are trade-offs with that. And like just be aware of those trade-offs.
um
Sorry.
yeah, it's a great
I'll
point.
get off my soapbox now.
No. I was actually I was looking something up to support your soapbox and make it more permanent because um I always like there's people that have only lived on the cloud and like everything else, if you choose the cloud to be a part of your system, and most of the time that's still a good choice for depending on it's like all kinds of decisions, like even who you hire,
Right.
like 'cause everyone knows how to work on AWS. So like kind of a safe bet. But when you look at the average like spend even for a small infrastructure in the cloud, it's astronomical. And um like you were saying, sometimes hosting your own stuff is just faster, uh faster, more efficient, like from a technical perspective. Like the disk is NVMe, the disk is local. There's
Yep.
essentially no latency. It's like a syscall to the OS, and then like the thing is
Correct.
essentially being written and flushed immediately. um versus a lot of abstractions. And I think you're totally right about that. And also just like the price is so dramatically different. If I here, I'm gonna actually configure a server on OVH right now. I want 128 gigs of RAM, an 8-core 16 thread Xeon. So this would be like for a small but like medium-sized app.
Right.
Let's get NVMe's just mirrored. So terabyte of NVMe SSD.
I love that you're doing this right now, by the way. This is great.
500 megabits unmetered dumb pipe, so up and down, all good. Private bandwidth, I don't need a ton. It's just going to be one server. I'll tell you what this price. I'm going to get this in Frankfurt, or let's do Quebec. This costs me $100 a month. It's like
$100 a month. So
try.
you're at $1,200 a year already, right? You're
It's
at
a
twelve hundred
fucking
dollars a year.
8XL on you know what I mean? Like you're paying a lot of money for this on Amazon or any of
Yeah.
the clouds.
No,
120.
I know. And you don't have full access to the hardware. I mean, I don't know if OVH you're getting like dedicated hardware. You probably are just a virtual machine shared on a hypervisor somewhere with other people. And like you have noisy neighbors.
Yes.
You are
Yeah.
paying more over the long run for your systems because now like $1,200 a year, I could have bought a pretty beefy like machine for $1,200,
Yeah.
and
That's
that
a
could last like
X2GD double extra large on Amazon, which costs uh on demand is gonna be, don't they have a monthly cost? Oh, sorry, cost. Let's say monthly.
Amazon's pricing page is sometimes hard to like figure out
Yeah, that's
because
$500 a month. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? So you're
like
5xing the cost immediately. And like you're saying, that's not one piece of hardware. That's a VM that can get moved around. Like the hardware could go bad and they can migrate it somewhere else, and you have like weird things
yep,
happening for a second.
and you
And
don't have
no
direct
way to
access to a
see that.
disk.
Like you don't
Yeah,
see when
yeah,
that happens. It's just like,
no.
whoa, our fucking latency just went through the roof.
And it's funny because like the arguments to this are usually, oh well, what happens when my app goes viral and I need more capacity? Well, first of all, what happens even if it's in the cloud?
Yeah.
You're going
It's
to
still
end
a
up
lot of
paying
work.
for
Yeah,
so congratulations, you probably don't
totally.
have auto scaling set up correctly, so you're probably not going to even respond to it
Yeah, no one
anyway.
does.
You're going to have to pay for the increased bandwidth like in and out of your application, right? Your bill is going to be insane probably. And sure, all the even if you did everything correctly, now you're just granted with a larger bill. Like that's what they give you when your app goes viral. Whereas at least if you're like owning your own infra for those workloads, sure, maybe you can't meet the demand of it, and maybe you do have to drop traffic, or maybe you do have to put like a cloud proxy in front of it to like limit how things hit your app or whatever. But you're in control. You understand that better.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know. I both have a world, right? Cloud and on premises have like their own worlds and their own use cases. But I think we've way over indexed on the cloud as the future to the point where we've seen now numerous companies come and go saying like the cloud is the future,
Yes.
and it didn't get them anywhere, right? Like I was at HashiCorp with you as well, and HashiCorp was telling the same story, like the cloud, 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 cloud. That didn't take them pretty far beyond IPO, right? Like look at it, right? Like I'm not gonna go into the acquisition stuff, but if the cloud really was the future, HashiCorp wouldn't have needed an acquisition, right? Like that's really the TLDR of it.
I
But
can, for legal reasons, not say anything
yeah,
here.
I'm not. Yeah, we'll get off that topic.
I,
We'll get off of that
but
topic.
I'm here. I'm still here. So you
Yeah,
must be saying something right. You
I'm
know,
still.
it's true. I think to take it back to the scaling thing, I think people just like And I think like cloud sales materials have vastly overestimated how hard it is to scale like
Yeah.
physical servers. Like, okay, dude, so say you're running this machine, right? You're not just like running this machine and pointing DNS at it. You're like, what if it fails? That would suck. Um, you're putting a load balancer in front of it. Dope. So put a smaller machine. You can still have a hella beefy machine, like bigger than just any load balancer that Amazon's going to give you. Did you know that when you suddenly show up on the front page of Reddit, your Amazon load balancer might fucking cough and die until they replace it with a bigger instance? Also transparent to you, so you don't know that that's happening. Latency goes to the roof. Again, all this abstraction has a real cost. When I worked at a company that did huge like Black Friday sales and went from like, probably 3,000 requests a second to like 15,000 requests a second, it just within hours. One of our steps at Amazon was like calling up our sales rep and being like, okay, do you have
Can I
the
have a
technical,
quota? Can I have a quota increase,
you
please?
have them
Hello?
pre-warm the load balancer, because otherwise you will simply the
You fall
actual
over.
that still lives on an instance. They do have to resize it and switch it over and do all the networking switches. It's like you can't have that when just a wall of traffic is hitting you. So that stuff is all still happening. That's not like less complex than you would do.
Yep.
Anyway, for $50 a month at OVH, you get a load balancer box or two that are, heart beating between them. Um, that does the same thing as the biggest load balancer that Amazon's going to give you, and then just stick more fucking machines behind it. They spin up within 5 minutes. You can
Yeah.
SSH into them. Like, do your Ansible script or like your Packer thing or whatever, have a custom image, then it's even
Yeah.
faster. But it's
I
like
agree.
scaling is
I
kind
think
of the
people,
same, it's just different.
yeah. I
And
think
how much
people should spend a little bit more time understanding that even if you own your infrastructure, you can do it in a way that is like scalable and safe, right? Like GCP had a major networking outage on May 16th.
Yeah.
What was that? Like 2 weeks ago, whatever that was now. And like all regions were affected. VPC down, cloud networking down, load balancing down, all just networking was done in GCP, right? Your packets would just like leave your network interface and never get a response, or if they did get a response, it was increased latency, whatever it was. It's just major issue. And it's
Nightmare.
like I'm not sitting here saying the cloud is less or more reliable or whatever, because reliability is a subjective thing that you can like, you know, play with depending on how much money you have. But if I'm running in a
That's a very
cloud,
wise statement. Can I just, for anyone who's listening, listen to what Matt just said
yeah.
again.
Yeah, I can make anything reliable for you if you give me infinite money.
Yep.
No problem. Like, but I was just looking at that, like, okay, your whole networking is down. And what am I supposed to do in that situation? I'm not multi-cloud, right? Because I've all in on GCP or whatever. Like, I have no control over whether this workload can be migrated easily because I can't even talk to the machines to like tell them like, hey, move your workload. Like, what am I
Yeah,
supposed
your
to be doing
state is
there?
like stuck in there. That's the problem, right?
Yeah,
Once you have the state in there, it's like,
yeah. And it's just like, I don't know, something there's something about knowing that like my colo rack is reliable and stable. And sure, it's maybe one region, but it's one reliable as heck region that I'm in control over. I don't know. There's something nice about that. And I'd like to see how the future plays out because cloud is only getting more expensive, as we already covered. And there's companies that are out there like Oxide. Oxide's the first one that comes to my mind because they are like building
great call.
the on-premises machines, but like with that cloud API that you love, right? Like EC2 instance create or whatever it is, they have that in Oxide's rack that you can do. And it's like programmable infrastructure that you own. Like congratulations, the NVMe disks that are in there are yours. You
Yeah.
have direct and full access to all of it. No noisy neighbor problem. No, none of this. It is your infra that you own. You get to decide the workload. Like, and a nice API on top. I think I think people are underestimating how big that's going to be as we grow in this industry and as we get more cost like aware, right?
It's a great
Because
point.
we've basically just given the bill to Amazon and said, hey, Amazon, charge me whatever you want. You have me, you know, I was gonna say by the balls, but like I guess we shouldn't say that. But you have me by the balls with
But
our
I think it's
billing.
still an appropriate figure of speech for the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all
Like
fun and good when the interest rates are zero and everyone thinks they're going to be the next Netflix. But like the chances that your little outfit doesn't need the insane scalability of Amazon, it's like pretty high. Like you could probably scale most businesses on the planet the old fashioned, not the old fashioned way. I'm not saying like manually provisioning servers and like running spare disks into a colo is the right way, but like OVH, there's a bunch of managed hardware things. OVH is one of them. There's
yep,
a million of them. Like you're talking about
yep.
Oxide. I think that's actually really interesting. I should look into them. But there's, we're engineers. We're not, just Amazon certified like salespeople. It's like give us the constraints of the system and we can engineer it. We can engineer it on AWS. We can engineer it on Google. We can
Right.
engineer it across multiple clouds if that's the thing you need. We can engineer it on hardware. We can even make large, a really great presentation. I'm always talking about this one, but Brian Hunter's, it's called Water Park. It was at Strange Loop a few years ago.
Oh, I gotta check that out.
It's about building a large distributed Elixir system. And what they did was he has just an incredible slide at the beginning of the presentation where he's like, like how many nines, if each of these is up like three, I think it's like 3 or 4 nines of the time, and you put these three components in series, how much availability, like how available are you? It's like 99.96.
Less.
Yeah. And then he's like,
Multiplication is subtractive,
yes,
man.
exactly. Exactly. But if you put them not in series, but in parallel, like you actually have it's insane. It's like 6 nines of
Yeah.
availability thing. And it's like by changing how you think and design systems, you dramatically affect the properties of those systems. They built this is actually really wild. They built a giant Elixir system that does not have a traditional database because that was an unacceptable like kind of bottleneck and single point of failure for them.
Yeah.
There's ways to do it, but they made the trade-off that all data is going to be in memory. It does get like snapshotted, I think, occasionally, but the live data is just kept in memory. And they have basically built their own cloud for this application by using hardware in, I think, 4 different data centers across the US, each with kind of like 2 availability zones inside of it. And they have 100% uptime over years because they designed the system to never fail and never go down. Something like 6% of US healthcare like treatment stuff goes
Yeah.
through. It's at a hospital company chain. But it just shows you like that is not on a fucking Amazon chart somewhere. That's
No, I know.
that's
I
someone
know.
working from first principles to engineer a system that fits their needs and doing it right.
And they own it, right? They own it. So like since you own it, you can make it work for your requirements in the way it needs to, like they're doing, right? I used to like
Yeah.
joke with my coworkers that at certain companies, like, oh, we could run our production systems on like my desktop computer if I
Yes.
put it in a closet. And like people are like, no, 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 you can't. I'm like, bro, do you see the usage across our like systems? If I add all of this up, we're not even using like 16 cores worth of CPU, right? And we're not even using like 64 gigs of RAM, even in our busy times. Yeah, I could run this on one server in the closet. I could do it. And
Yes.
no, like I'd save us so much money. And then their argument's always like, oh, but it'll be like unreliable because it's a single point of failure. It's like, but your distributed system is already a single point of failure because you're going to the same database.
Yes.
You think that you're not because you're in one region, right?
Exactly.
Like, and even if I did have a single point, and I think the DDIA book talks about this a little bit. I don't remember if it was that book or another one, but they mentioned a thing where even if you have a single point of like a single region like system, right? A single like system. Even though it's a single point of failure, it's also a more simple system to manage and bring back up. So even if it can fail, like because something went wrong with it, it's faster to like recover as well. Versus like a more distributed system that when it fails, it can fail pretty miserably and be
Yeah.
very difficult to like recover from.
Second order
And
effects, like all this unpredictable shit
yes,
happens.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not sitting here saying like distributed systems are bad. No, they're great. but they require a lot more
They come
work.
with other costs. Yeah.
Right. They come with a lot more work. It's like buying a Ferrari and wondering why your brake
Yeah.
changes
Why am I
cost,
paying $800 in maintenance a month
$3,000.
to go to the grocery store?
Yeah,
Like, this is not a
exactly.
grocery store car.
Exactly. Exactly. Meanwhile, it's like, okay, I'll just take my Toyota Corolla to the grocery store.
I haven't changed the
Sure, it's
oil
not,
in 15 years, but it's
yeah,
fine.
I haven't touched the oil in 15 years. It's fine. Like, but when it does go bad, oh, every store around me carries the parts for it. So
Yeah.
I can bring it back into service very quickly. Like that's kind of the idea. And I think I just want engineers that are listening to this to not just jump into something because everyone else is doing it and that's what the marketing's telling you. Like, of course, companies are going to want you to use the cloud. They get paid for it. But like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google all want you to use the cloud. Why? Because they own it.
Yeah.
Like, of course they want you to use the cloud. It's not
Yeah.
better. It's better for them to get more money.
Yeah.
Right?
$500 for the same server, not even, is dope. And that's before you pay for your traffic. So like,
Yeah,
listen,
you need to pay. You need to
you're about to that bill is going to be big. Like, you better hope you don't go viral because you're going to be paying.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, sorry. I know we were on this
No,
topic for
no, I love it. I'm going to make a shirt based on something you said. You're talking about this thing. I was thinking you're right. From a certain perspective, like, different things are single points of failure, and a lot of the time people don't like zoom to the correct perspective to see that. And I was going to
right.
make a t-shirt that says, like, the real point of failure, the real single point of failure was Earth all along. It's like, there is always kind of like a single whatever. Anyway, you just got to pick where it is for your specific use case.
Agreed.
One, this is the last thing, outside thing I'm going to bring up. I swear, I know we're like running out of time.
Yep.
You reminded me. I read this thing last week. It was an article on motherduck.com called "Big Data is Dead" by Jordan Tigani. This is a person, I think, that was on one of the original Google teams that did like
Yeah.
EMR, like MapReduce stuff in the early craze, like the early 2010s of like big data, like your data's too big. And anyway, this guy's been consulting for, I'm going to say, the last 15 years on this kind of stuff after Google, and was more or less saying most, like you were saying, we could run this in like my closet. Like, why do we need all this shit for? Why are we paying 50 grand a month for infrastructure? There's the data world is kind of like that too. Companies are like, oh, we're so important. We have so much data. Like, we need a data warehouse. Most of the companies that are this guy's consulting for with big contracts, he goes in and it's like they have like a terabyte of data or something. And he's like, you can fucking fit this on a hard drive. Like,
I
why
could
are
literally
you
run
using,
the compute for that
yeah,
right now on my phone.
like,
Like,
you
come
can
on.
rent a server that has that much memory, put it in memory, run all the queries you want against it as
Yeah.
inefficiently as you would like. And like, what are we doing with a $500,000 a year subscription to some, like,
I need paralyzed compute to manage his data. No, you don't,
yes,
man. Go.
yeah,
I know
you
we
need a
gotta end
SQL
in a
query,
second,
I believe,
but
but that's
like
about it.
the 1 billion row challenge, engineers that listen to this, look that up. It's about querying like 1 billion rows of data and how you can make it very efficient. It was a challenge. A lot of people did it, but
Right.
check it out. You can see there are things you can do to make working with large data very efficient. And like cloud computing kind of is incentivized to just say throw another compute node at it. That's not always the best way to do it. I'll end with that.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I know you know, I definitely keep talking longer, but I have to drop to actually record another podcast. So
Are you really? You are such an
yeah,
influencer.
I'm
Beth,
literally recording another podcast
stop
in like 1
influencing for
minute.
1 second. You're just influencing all over the place. That's disgusting.
I know, I'm sorry. We didn't even get to talk about influencers today. We didn't even get to talk
You're too
about
busy
it.
influencing to talk about influence. Ridiculous.
The problem was me all along.
I didn't want to say anything.
Anyway,
But
yeah.
listen,
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
been a pleasure.
Appreciate it. We'll do more.
Yeah, we'll do this again soon.
Buy his book.
Bye. Oh, thank you. Thank you. If I didn't have you, I literally would make no money at all. It's
Yeah, I got you, man. Don't worry.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Wait, do the thing with me. Put the hand on the thing, See, you're so
I know.
professional. It's too far away now. You have like
It's so far
camera
away.
rig is like a
dude.
mile away.
I like reached for
Jesus,
it.
look at this guy. All right.
Oh man.
Later.
See you later.